This is Berkeley Talks, a UC Berkeley news podcast from the Office of Communications and Public Affairs that features lectures and conversations at Berkeley. You can follow Berkeley Talks wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're also on YouTube at Berkeley News. New episodes come out every other Friday. You can find all of our podcast episodes with transcripts and photos on UC Berkeley News at news.berkeley.edu/podcasts.
I'm here and I'm going to start with a little disambiguation. So I'm going to talk about the deep worldview behind PauseAI and the theory of change behind PauseAI. So I'm Holly Elmore and I have a PhD in evolutionary biology. So that's sort of my intellectual background. I also want to mention that I didn't go into academia after I graduated. I worked at a think tank for 3 years on the topic of wild animal welfare, like how we can help, how do wild animals feel? Maybe could we make them feel better? And then it was from there that I left that job to start PauseAI US. So that's the legal entity that I am the executive director of. I'm also a co-founder of the PauseAI movement, and the big other co-founder is Joep Meindertsma, who's in the Netherlands, and he runs the organization now called PauseAI Global, which runs more of the digital resources, and like the big Discord is the PauseAI Global Discord. And was there something else I wanted to say about that? I had a lot of caveats to front load. Right. So just bear in mind that, there's PauseAI, the movement, which is, which like spiritually includes like everyone who wants to pause AI. Then there's PauseAI, the legal entities, and, in PauseAI US, there's like a couple levels of membership. So there's like a volunteer agreement you have to sign before you do a protest with us, or before you run a local org, or participate in some of our events. So like that's a level. I'd call those volunteers. And then there's like the paid staff of the org, which is quite small. It's me and 2 other people right now. So there might be like a number of times when it would be tempting to think of PauseAI as one thing. It's probably not that big a deal for this talk, but I just want to let you know. Should I be able to increment this? Okay. So to be in PauseAI, like what it means to be in PauseAI are only these stipulations, which is we don't know what we're doing with frontier AI. And this could be catastrophically dangerous. Also, even if it's not exactly catastrophically dangerous, like the people don't want their lives radically disrupted in lots of ways. So, the consent of the people matters on this. 2, the default should be pausing, and we should have the possibility of never unpausing from AI development, frontier AI development. And 3, it's feasible to pause through international agreement. So this is all you have to agree with to join PauseAI, if that feels right to you. But how we get there is, I'm going to, again, make some fine distinctions at the beginning. So this is like, I don't know, for people who aren't familiar with theory of change language, there's like a difference between the vision, which is the world that we want, and your mission. And then I'm listing 2 missions here, which is PauseAI, the movement, and then this is PauseAI US's mission. So the vision of PauseAI is a world where there's been a global treaty to pause frontier AI and society is thriving. But we don't think that like our actions alone are going to create that world. Like this is just like the end state that we want. PauseAI, the movement's mission is grassroots activities and education to move the Overton window to support this treaty. And then PauseAI US is taking place in the US. So what our mission is to influence US politicians to act in supporting a treaty and domestic safety measures. So better than nothing kind of safety stuff just within the US via grassroots and education. So why is this what we want? Why is that the world that we want without frontier AI, dangerous frontier AI with the treaty? And why are we pursuing it through grassroots political actions and education? Now I'm going to get into worldview section. So one big thing, and this is, I should also say, PauseAI, the reason I broke out those like 3 things that are just like, that's all it is with PauseAI, is that lots of people could want to pause AI for lots of reasons. And as long as you agree to not do violence and not break the law, whatever reason you have for wanting to pause AI is good, and you're in the team. So it's a big tent movement. Um, the so to fill in sort of like why you would want to do things this way, I'm gonna mostly draw from my own worldview and experience and like why I made the org this way. Um, so I'm going to but it's also something that's pretty in common among people who think deeply about this, and especially since you guys are more familiar with like the AI risk thinking and the various kind of intellectual strains behind it. It's kind of what distinguishes us from the other groups in AI safety. So our world is fragile, and species go extinct as a rule. This is something that I definitely understood after doing a PhD in biology. My goodness, so I just picked an image to show this. This is extinction since 1500 due to us, basically. It's so this is the rate of extinction of species in these different groups since 1500. And then even this background rate here, even though it seems pretty low, it's enough to ensure that more than 99% of all species that ever existed are extinct now. So this is the idea that we're imperturbable, of course, like nothing can be so bad as to like affect the world that, it ruins the things we can count on, like humans are here, is a pretty deep part of the worldview. And a lot of people who are into X-risk have the, fragile world worldview. That's Nick Bostrom. You may recognize his fragile world hypothesis. That's one thing he lists as kind of a crux in this. And then I found this cool little demo of competitive exclusion, just one of the many things so the idea of competitive exclusion is that if two species are trying to occupy exactly the same niche, the more fit one will outcompete the other and it drives them to extinction. So there's just so many ways other than just like habitat destruction or anything that it's very normal for species to not last forever. It's hard. It's the unusual thing is species persisting. So that leads into this idea that like there are lots of equilibria that we depend on and that a more powerful intelligence could disrupt and we wouldn't even know. Think like these animals that go extinct in these categories because of mostly human development. So like habitat loss and then like affecting the climate. They didn't know, and like they're not trying to maintain certain equilibria. They just live in a world where they used to be something dependable and now they're not. So environmental equilibria, like there are things that we just did not know we were doing, even before we've done it already. There might be social world equilibria. So perhaps, it feels like you're getting companionship from a chatbot, but you're not missing some vital nutrient we don't know about at first people thought it was cool to eat radium. Have you guys ever seen the Radium Girls? They thought they were reasoning it's like the sun, it's like power, it's good, it's bright, and they thought it was really neat. Like the Radium Girls who lost their jaws eventually, it was considered a benefit of that job that they got to lick the radium paintbrush to sharpen it because they got to eat the radium. It wasn't even like a side effect. It was the point, So we don't know things about how the world works because we've never had, our body assimilates, it thinks it's calcium, it assimilates radium, then it decays and your bones decay. There's so much like this, and definitely as a scientist, a deep appreciation for how much you don't, especially a biologist, for how much you don't realize, what is in the empirical world. And then societal equilibria, I think a great example of this is the institution of jobs. Is it possible to have a better equilibrium than working to live? I think so, probably. But if you blow up the institution of jobs without having an idea of how to replace it, it could be pretty horrible. So right now we have actually a pretty solid, people need each other based on their abilities, something like being themselves. If that went away, that could be very bad. So overall, it's not that better equilibria are impossible. It's just we need to know how to reach them, and it could be very, very, very hard. So this is the way that we're doing development now is clearing a minefield with, one at a time by taking little steps at a time. You still, when you hit a mine, what do you expect to happen? You blow up. That's how you learn. And you can't afford that. I'm saying we can't afford it with technology as powerful as AI. There's also, the dead ass expectation of many people in AI safety for many years has been that when we got to this point, the AI, once it was aligned, would figure out the answers for us. This is not good enough. This is not going to happen because we need to be the source of truth about what is good for us. You might think the AI is aligned and not know. Really, there's only one source of truth, and that's like being the entity whose experience you're trying to protect. And yeah, as I say, in general, experiments are costly. And so experiments are costly in the sense that like experimenting with where the mines are in minefield on foot is costly. But the probability of accidents, even accidents that aren't big enough to destroy the world, but the probability of lots of accidents that will probably happen with increasing AI capabilities up until that level of power are more likely the more that we increase AI capabilities. And each one reduces our capacity to do better, respond better to accidents in the future. So, and then of course, with capabilities high enough, one day the accidents could one shot. So the scale of the danger really could cripple civilization or cause extinction. And the possibility of this alone is reason enough to pursue pausing frontier AI development. So this is a difference frequently between us and other people in the X-risk world. X-risk doesn't have to be these crazy high numbers. There was a vogue a couple years ago for like in the 90s, like everybody had like P-Doom in the 90s. And like it does not have to be that high to like justify not taking, like rolling the dice for extinction. Like just don't roll them, If 5% chance of extinction is extremely high. It's really intolerably high. And also there's this idea of kind of like burden of proof issue where people will come at you and like ask about like, well, what exactly is going to happen? Like, I don't get it. And if they're just asking for like, how could it happen? Like, so I can understand it all. Good. Give them an example. Otherwise, there's kind of this sense that like, well, if you don't know exactly how we're going to die, like down to like, shot for shot, then like, why should we listen to you? Like, I think I need to know how we're going to live shot for shot from you before we make this technology. And PauseAI, as we'll talk about in the theory of change section, is about kind of reestablishing that proper, burden of proof. So we already know we're vulnerable because the world is fragile, because we know there's lots of equilibria we don't know about, because we know that developing AI is bringing us into higher territory of capability and intelligence. And then finally, the people of the world do not consent to have frontier AI forced on them. So this is just one of, dozens of polls I could have selected, but this is showing 80% agreement this year in April and May that the people's priorities are safety, even if it means going slower to develop AI. So our worldview includes, and this is sometimes with their X-risk people, a little bit a matter of debate, like whether it matters that people want this technology. There's often a lot of, I would love to talk about this in like question time if you guys are interested, but I didn't put it in this talk. I think there's a lot of like worldview stuff that kind of sees like it as you can't tell somebody not to do something, unless you can prove that it's the same as violence or something. You can't tell somebody not to do something. And they also tend to believe that everybody else thinks that. But actually, like the people don't generally have a problem with saying, don't do things that could hurt me. Like that. So there's like a lot, PauseAI is trying to bring like the worldview is that people don't want this and they have a right to advocate for what they don't want. Oops, I think that should say worldview, sorry. So what about alignment? The PauseAI position is different from my personal position. The PauseAI position is agnostic. It could happen or it couldn't. We just know that we need the time and the governance to be able to pursue and see if alignment is possible. And having a pause in place protects us either way, because if it's not, we don't unpause. Good, phew. If we have the pause in place, then we get the quality alignment, the time to get the proper kind of research and development, then good. My personal view, and I anticipate this could be a big question time thing, is that the idea of alignment of AI is philosophically confused. There's no state of being aligned that isn't contingent on external factors constantly to continue to persist. So yeah, how much I really tried hard to constrain what I talk about in this part of the talk of this because I could say a lot. And then I further think that alignment between entities of vastly different capabilities may be impossible. So it may be that anything that seems like alignment that we're familiar with today is contingent on roughly equal levels of possibilities. I have never done like rigorous work to try to prove this or go after it, but this is my worldview, and I'd love to talk about it if people are interested in this part of it. And a reason that I think this is because of my background in evolutionary theory, a lot of it. So I did a great deal of thinking about genetic misalignment, which is called meiotic drive, the form of genetic misalignment called meiotic drive. Very, very quick background on meiosis. I would also love to get into this. I do have, it's on the next page. I have something you can follow to find like a long blog post I did on making this comparison. But genetic meiosis is the process that governs our genes and kind of makes the likelihood of getting to the next generation a fair process. And long story short, it kind of allows natural selection to work because it means that genes have to work together to make an organism, and that's the only way to reproduce. Because genes could actually reproduce themselves through other means, and if they could do that successfully, then it would, harm the integration of the organism. And in the world, oh, you can't see this at all. Okay, sorry. In just like the world of organisms, so this axis is cooperation, more cooperation to less cooperation, and this is more conflict to less conflict. And this is about sort of how well associated like the pieces of a whole are so this paper, I love this paper. It's Queller-Strassman, 2009. It's something like Toward a View of Organismality. I would highly recommend this paper. But the idea is that you get different levels of cooperation and different levels of integration. Like our cells, pretty integrated. But if you look at other animals, you will see, so like what's a great example of this? Like, this is maybe getting a little in the weeds. So I don't want to get too confusing. So so we think usually of our genes as like their job is to be in the genome making the organism. But actually, like, no, they're kind of one level of organization of this whole. And our genes are fairly tight, but there are some configurations of genes, like alliances of genes, which are not very tight. Like amoeba can come together and like work together sometimes, and then they separate. Like our cells can't separate and be their own thing. So genes can also kind of do this. And this is like a very mind trippy like thing to learn, and it's tough. I'd love to say more if people are confused, but I also don't want to confuse you. The upshot is that what we even take to like when we think of alignment, we're thinking about unitariness that probably doesn't really exist, even in things that we think are aligned, like a person with their own interests, that sort of thing. And I do also want to say, from the extinction point, this is a tree this is like one of 28 individuals left in this species. And like, it's kind of rare to catch an extinction that is caused by genetic misalignment. but like this species is going to go extinct when these individuals die, basically, because it does this thing where there's conflict between parts of the partitions of the genome. So the paternal genome kicks out the maternal genome early in development. And because of that, it's accumulating mutations and stuff, and that's going to cause this species to go extinct. Just to give you like a flavor of like what can happen even at the gene level, and like how much like our ideas about alignment that are being applied to alignment, like humans or a human with AI, like are very simplistic and very like broad brush about kind of like who are individuals and things like that, and like topics that I think like are enough to make it so that any like seemingly adequate model breaks down. So yeah, this is on my Substack. I have a blog post to compare meiotic drive to gradient hacking. I don't know who's all into all of those pieces, but I did write this. And then the point I want to make here, quickly is that evolutionary theory kind of gives uncommon insights on this sort of stuff, like thinking about misalignment and technical safety. So almost always misalignment is talked about in terms of agents being misaligned. But based on meiotic drive and sort of based on like a looser understanding of like what makes something an organism, like how integrated it is, I think that circuits not getting with the program is a relatively neglected possibility. So like, I probably won't get into that too deep, but there's, the circuits the simplest example would be like, it's possible based on all of my thinking about meiotic drive, I then came to looking at ML systems like for safety reasons. And I thought, the first thing I thought is about like little cabals of circuits that resist updating. So like the simplest example of meiotic drive is like two genes that they both want to be inherited, more in the next generation, more than the rule, which is like they can't go over 50%. And one way to do it is, so in mouse sperm, there's this thing called the T haplotype that has a poison that it makes. And then also, if you have the whole T locus, you have the antidote. But if that gets broken up by recombination, then the gametes, the sperm that don't have both will die. So it can make a poison that kills everybody, but the ones that have both. And then that way, even though the organism is less fit, because now it has like less sperm overall, some of it's been killed, the relative fitness of that genotype is like 100% or like close to 100%. So that's rewarded by natural selection. So, I mean, I haven't gone further into like empirically looking into these things, but it seems to me very likely that there are circuits that just resist updating by means like this. Like whatever is done to disturb them increases the loss. And so they just don't get updated. Will this matter or not? There are things about, you can, I shouldn't get into it. You should read this blog post if you're interested in how like that could possibly matter or not. But there's just a lot that's like left on the table, I feel like currently with what the field is. Then evolutionary theory and evolutionary knowledge like about the world can really help out. A deeper sort of worldview thing is like I believe a lot in ecological validity. And that's something that almost never comes up in X-risk discussions. It's so in biology, there's like, you can have a model that works and is internally consistent. And that's one good thing. But in order for people to really care, it has to also be ecologically valid. So there's many things that could exist and make sense. They're not ecologically valid. It has to be, true according to like empirical measurements in the real world. I have put so many confusing terms in here. I'm sorry. I'm going to explain what I mean by most of these I made up. Deep Goodharting. Everybody knows what Goodharting is, right? No. Okay. So Goodharting is it's like making a measure into a target. So it's like you have a real goal, and then you're like, well, in order to approximate my goal of having a good marriage, I'm going to go on one date a week, and then if it gets to the point where you're going on a date at the expense of a good marriage, like you've kind of lost sight of what you were trying to optimize for, that's Goodharting. It's similar to like, it can be similar to reward hacking. It's like a form of Goodharting. So this is probably even too confusing. I almost want to cover it up while I say this one because I don't want to distract you guys. Sorry. So I have an appreciation that things can really seem like the models and the abstract things we come up with can seem true. And it's really important that we do try to, find abstract models that make sense because that's good for prediction. But with ourselves, we need to be careful not to do that. Like we are the source of truth on like what actually is like what we like, what is good for us, our thriving. Like our experiences are the source of truth. And if you have an idea that like some have about AI that like, well, the AI would kind of know how to be better. And so I would like to be changed and be better. Like, I think like what makes you happy is probably like an extremely complex utility function. And like, if we think we've captured the utility function, we probably haven't. So like, proposals for alignment generally there have been different proposals over the years, right? So there's like, you go back to like the 90s and the proposals are about like programming this AI correctly, like an analytic symbolic AI, and giving it the right utility function, like finding like the von Neumann utility function of a human and like making sure the AI has the same one. And then it's like kind of like they're the same entity at that point. So it's all about finding the utility function, you know. I don't think you can, I think I'm very skeptical about getting it, you know, at all in the first place. So I don't think you can kind of give up. And then of course, in that scenario, once you give the AI the utility function and like let it go, then like it's in charge, you know, it's more powerful always. Even like more, you know, today's scenarios, like alignment proposals like scalable oversight and super alignment are, they're sort of like more ecologically valid, like they keep more data. They're not trying to like nail down what is the utility function, like they have no idea. But they're taking humans out of the loop so that like the process, it's not synced up with what our utility function is. Like it is like a more complicated, it's not trying to like simplify what is the utility function, what's like, you know, what gets rewarded, but it's still not connected like to the source of truth. So I think the term I have put on this is ecological validity for utility functions. And then the thing I'm contrasting it to, I call like deep good hearting, like the idea that like, well, I know what my terminal values are, so I'm just going to change myself in the direction, or I'm going to allow myself to be changed in the direction, or I'm going to make AI that is kind of a version of me that is in that direction. I think that that's losing sight of, I mean, I think it's very, very likely losing sight of like truly like what our true utility function is and the thing we're actually trying to preserve and optimize. So long story short on here, like don't think that through AI right now, we're very likely to get what we want out of alignment. So alignment kind of feels like a fantasy. To me, like most days, I think alignment is kind of a fantasy. Like the level of alignment or the way that alignment has been talked about in the past is like probably a fantasy. But the org is officially agnostic. If you can have a different opinion on this, the point is, no matter what, we should be pausing now, figuring this out during the pause, and not unpausing until it's safe enough. Okay, so now to the theory of change section. So what are we doing about this worldview? Why have we picked the means that we have, the mission that we have? Okay, so I wish I had covered this. So the Overton window, first of all, what is the Overton window? It is the window, it's of kind of thinkable sentiments. And I liked this graphic. This is just the one on Wikipedia. But it's if you're smack in the middle of the Overton window, then like obvious. Of course, this is how things are. Like Ample will enforce, you know, how things are in the middle. And then as you kind of move away, like things seem less and less thinkable. Finally, when it's outside of the Overton window, it's unthinkable. So our belief, the PauseAI theory of change, is that the people actually want a pause. They don't all know it yet. They don't know enough about this issue to know that's like the name of what they want. But according to polls, and you know, like we see like what their priorities are safety. And so they want, you know, they don't want catastrophic problems, even if they don't know about the possibility of like catastrophic X risk. They know that they don't want like a harmful disruption to society. So when they understand through, you know, education, what's going on, they're going to tell their representatives, they're going to, you know, exert their power, they're going to tell the people around them. And the Overton window will shift and it's going to compound, you know, it's going to make it so that now the people who were kind of one step over are exposed and so on and so on. And this is our theory, this is the basis of our theory of change, is that we have this sort of untapped will, but like the way people are thinking about it, they don't know enough, or there's certain like emotional hangups, or there's pressure, obviously, from like industry and motivated actors to stop them from realizing this. But if we educate them and then we also present the pause, kind of use techniques to push the Overton window, then we can get what we want, which I think is nope. Then we can move on to the next idea, which is so one thing that's keeping pause outside of the center of the Overton window, outside of becoming policy, is that it's very difficult emotionally to think about a lot of the issues involved in X risk. And I'm sure I'm probably not, telling you guys that for the first time. You probably experienced it. So a lot of it is just like holding space so that it's safe for people to like think about it long enough to learn about it, to decide like, is this what I think? And it's difficult for a number of reasons. It's difficult because you have to think about like the possibility of being in a lot of danger, which of course we don't want to be true. It's difficult because there's a lot of pressure from people around you not to pull them into something scary, or especially like probably more our circles, there's a lot of pressure not to, push against like a lot of, I personally know many people who work at AI labs. It's very difficult for me to like tell them like, you are doing a bad thing. I think you're doing a bad thing. People don't want to do that with their friends. They don't want to, but if this issue were more in the middle of the Overton, or if pause were more in the middle of the Overton window, then it would be their friends who were like, I know, they would be the ones who felt like, it's not really okay that I'm working at the AI lab, but do you accept me? Do you accept me anyway? Like that's the effect of the Overton window, is kind of what everybody else is thinking around us, what's like okay to think. And then I have a short blog post on this that kind of defines everything I just said, but from the by contrast, which is this concept of rhetorical answers, which is another coinage in my. So the example I give there is like people saying like, well, humanity deserves to die if that's true. Like they don't believe that, but it's just like that. And you wouldn't be able to get away with saying that about something that was more central in the Overton window. Like you wouldn't be able to get away with saying like, well, murder should be okay. Like it's really hard to deal with. But because pause and AI danger and like handling AI danger through governance like is kind of on the edges of the Overton window, people can, instead of having to go through the hard work of thinking the scary things, they can go like, like wave it off and say something like, well, we deserve to die. Or say something like, well, AIs can't make new knowledge. So there you go. So nothing will ever happen, So I have a list of that kind of rhetorical answer on AI. And I think a lot of probably the single biggest rhetorical answer I hear is something along the lines of, we're cooked, it's over, it's too late, it's inevitable. And like, generally, like if you answer a few questions for the person, they don't really think that, or you kind of like dig a little deeper. It's not that they really think that, it's that they don't know what to do next. Like they don't know what the next step is. They feel like they would be unpopular. They feel like they would be missing out on like the cool AI stuff if they even entertain that possibly it's bad. They want to kind of be free to just think it's cool and keep like playing with their friends. Like there's a lot going on. So a part of our theory of change is simply to hold space. And the way we hold space is by having sort of like a compassionate education that is not fear-mongering or, too, especially too, it's emotional. I mean, it is an emotional issue, but trying to like keep a level head, set like a tone that allows people like the safety to consider, the psychological safety to consider what we're saying. And then also just making the pause position more popular is a way to hold space for people, because the more that they have heard of this position before, they know people who hold it, or they just know that other people will know if they hold the pause position that it's like one of the positions. Like all of those things make it easier for them to then deal with like the difficulty you have to go through to really understand it or decide if you believe that this is what to do. I also want to cram in the concept of inside and outside game real fast. And then I'll tell you what rebalancing the center is once I've done that. So inside game is kind of like working within industry, generally it's like working within a system that you want to change for the purpose of trying to change it from the inside. Outside game is putting external pressure on that system from the outside for the purpose of trying to get it to change. And you can get a beautiful synergy between those two. Like what the people do outside affects what the people do. It makes like whatever's inside look a lot more moderate, and so you can really play off each other. this is taken from a bigger talk where I have these colors mean something, but the ball is supposed to kind of represent the Overton window and like where it is. And just by the way, like in AI safety, for some reason, for the last 10 years, like it's very unusual for like a cause to evolve this way, but pretty much all of the AI safety work is inside game, which is weird. Like most social movements or like issues start with people like on the outside saying like, hey, this is bad, or trying to raise awareness about it. And that's kind of what the public understands more. Like they think pretty much any member of the public thinks like, well, if I thought something like AI danger was happening, then I would, of course, like tell everybody. I would like raise it, scream it from the mountaintops. There's historical reasons that it ended up this way, like which, if you like talking about it, we could talk about it in question time. But because of that, it was really valuable to start doing more outside game stuff. This is an example of Overton window pushing. So this is one way you push the Overton window. So it goes from there to there just because you put like a heavy weight kind of far on the outside game side. So PauseAI is talking directly to the public, trying to be understandable, doesn't do stuff within industry. We're not trying to like be diplomats. We are saying like, you're doing the wrong thing. This is dangerous and you need to stop. And it's in a way that's really legible from the outside. So suddenly, it makes a lot of good things. It makes like kind of for the entire system, it makes it more thinkable that there should be external regulation of the industry than if all of the people trying to do something good are within the industry. And other dynamics there, just kind of, so this is what's called rebalancing the center by having like a radical flank. I put this in quotes because I think PauseAI is like supremely moderate. We're like totally nonviolent, don't even do anything illegal. Literally, I assign a volunteer at demonstrations to make sure we don't block the sidewalk because that would be illegal. Like we're scrupulously law-abiding, and our line is just, we shouldn't make dangerous AI. So in like a more objective sense, I think PauseAI is very moderate, but because of how loaded AI safety was toward academics and in industry, it has a big effect to even just be moderate and be more outside. Geez, I thought I made this short. Going on with the theory of change, we're trying to shift the burden of proof back onto AI developers to prove that it's safe to proceed, rather than on the person saying, hey, this could be dangerous, to like prove that it would definitely drive everyone extinct. So what I really want to emphasize about this burden of proof shifting is that it is not a technical discussion. So this is a trick that people pull all the time. They'd be like, well, where is your ML PhD? Like, how are you like qualified to say that what's going to happen? And that is not the discussion at all. The discussion is about what level of risk is acceptable and who gets to decide. There's no answer. There's no like, because you're in ML, like what the right level of safety is. And and who gets to decide should be the people at risk, Like, yes, there's things that scientists understand that like the public doesn't. So they could be, you could be wrong in what you tell your representative you want or something. It could be unnecessary. But this is mostly not a technical discussion. This is about what risk is acceptable. And shifting the Overton window towards these more conservative safety standards is how, like within the industry, is how industry with it, ideally, the pause would impose externally. To shift the risk tolerance is just crazy now. We're just totally frog boiled on it. Like Elon Musk says, the risk is 20%, his PDUM is 20%, and people are like, oh, it's low. Like that's why he's doing all these risks, because it's low. That's 1 in 5. That's worse than Russian roulette odds. We don't have to do this, and we don't have to listen to them just because they want to make it. Okay, it's our lives, So this is about just kind of taking our power back and not being like rhetorically tricked into like feeling helpless or like there's nothing we can do. Another thing is, who's heard of warning shots? Should I explain what that is? Okay, I'll explain because it's not it. So there's this idea that, it's kind of a funny story. When I first started doing PauseAI organizing, I like went to some like big, names, which I won't name, like in AI safety at the time, and like funders. And they told me, they're like, oh, why don't you just wait until there have been warning shots? Because then the people will just rise up. Like they think there's nothing to organizing. So, but like it's been part of the AI safety worldview for a long time that there will be these smaller catastrophes. Hopefully, they hope for it. You can read more about this in my blog post about it. But they're hoping that there will be small catastrophes that just kind of show everybody, like, basically, we're right, and you should do what we say, and that'll kind of make it easy. And so it's not uncommon to hear in the AI safety world, like, people saying, well, we just have to hope for warning shots. Like, and I think, one, we should never, that's just the wrong headspace to be hoping for a disaster at all. We should always be trying to stop them. But like, two, they're not just going to happen by themselves. Even if there are these disasters, which could well happen, people aren't going to know what they mean unless they've been told, unless they have the education, unless they have the ability to interpret the events themselves. Like, it's not just obvious what it means. Like, so a part of the reason that we educate people is so that they will be able to interpret events as they happen. Maybe you're not convinced now, exactly by my story, but I tell you sort of what you would expect, and you have like a deep enough understanding that, and then when the moment happens, like when like the thing you were kind of waiting for to answer your question happens, you have like a, whoa, okay, I know it's true. And I had one of these with ChatGPT. So I known about AI danger for a long time, or like the possibility, but like there were like, I don't know, I had like kind of mildly negative feelings toward it. I didn't like sort of the way that people talked about it. But I knew enough about it, and I had this background in like neuroscience and animal minds and things like that. And ChatGPT, then I especially thought that like I might never see a machine be able to speak in natural language. Like, I knew a lot about linguistics. I knew a lot about like the Chomsky like position and like his debates with people. And so when I saw ChatGPT talking like a human, I was like, wow, oh my God, like so much. It's like, and I have these images. Yeah, it's like setting up. For a warning shot to work, you have to have like a lot of dominoes set up. And I had my dominoes set up really well. Like, I had a lot of dominoes set up, and like when that warning shot happened, it was just like, boo, 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 this means this means this. And I thought, huh. And then like 6 months later, I started PauseAI US. A lot changed. I went from kind of being like, nah, I don't love this field to like doing it, quitting my job and doing it. But if people don't have that background, then, so like an example here is, somebody learns that a chatbot can help a person like assemble a bioweapon. Well, if they don't have any educational reason to like that this lands, then they're just like, well, then it's not. I mean, so what? That still seems like their fault. I don't understand. It's not like the tool like made them evil. And so then when an actual bioweapons powered attack happens, they're like kind of like, yeah, I heard about this before. Like, and they think it's kind of not connected. So the whole point of warning shots, or hoping for warning shots, was supposed to be that people would start to act as if the real thing were happening and start to get prepared. But it can kind of go the other way too, I fear that, but when you educate them, you increase this person's domino so that like they do know what it means when the warning shot happens, then maybe now they get it. So with our education, we're thinking, just in general with education, it would be great if we could just say we predict this, and then it would happen, and then everybody would know we were right. If I did know what to predict, I would be trying to stop it pretty more directly than that probably. But if I did know what to predict, I would do that. I would tell people like, hey, like, look out your window on this day, and you're going to see this thing, and you're going to know I'm right. That would be great. But we don't know what's going to happen with this. Is really like the nature of the danger of AI is it's intelligence. It's like creative decision making. It's doing things it's finding ways to get what it wants that you didn't think of, and having the ability to like do powerful stuff, that causes lots of bad side effects. So the education strategy has to be general. It has to be understanding why we're already worried, and what we fear coming up. And then people have to have their own ideas that they arrived at themselves about what they would expect, what do they predict, and then and so that they can have that experience of like, yep, here it is, like it was right. So warning shots are and they aren't kind of a part of our theory of change, because I think that in the absence of, I think the best thing we can do, both to take advantage of warning shots and if there aren't any warning shots, is just to prepare and educate people straightforwardly. This is education is not the only thing we do. Cut for time. Everything else we do, would love to tell you. Um, but what can you do? What can academics and students do to help? On research, it's just a note. I'm increasingly kind of black-pilled on this, which is that pretty much every time we get knowledge about these systems, it is dual use. So there's really not knowledge that's like only good about these systems. And we don't always know. So like cautionary tale, mechanistic interpretability. Many, many years, this was always like the good one, like the thing that would like definitely, if we just had mechanistic interpretability, then it would be fine. I wish I had thought about this more deeply at the time because for one, like who is reading it and who are they using it for, like, and two, can't it be used for recursive self-improvement? Probably cheaper than doing more training runs, right? Especially if, AI can interpret things that we can't interpret and it knows how to make changes and then that's out of our hands. I mean, the opportunities there for like explosive growth are really scary. So like even like the thing that everybody thought was like the most benign is actually dangerous. Now it looks like it will be dangerous. Here's a prediction from me, like you will see interpretability being used in recursive self-improvement. I think probably soon. I think that's why Dario wrote that essay about interpretability and tried, along with like leading around for an interpretability group. I think he sees that as a potential future use. So be careful is all I'm saying. I would love to talk more about this if people have specific questions, but fundamentally, all of this stuff is dual use and we don't know where things are going. And I think what will make research safe is governance, like external authority and oversight and accountability to like what's good for people. And I think just like we can make useful nuclear technologies because we have that governance, like I think we will be able, to have useful AI in a world with the proper governance, but not before. I think I really, really strongly caution against trying to use technical means to shortcut that process. I mean, there's a lot of temptation to do that in AI safety, especially because the people in it are researchers. And I really think there's no shortchanging this process. To really have safe AI, we do have to have good governance no matter what. But directly, what can you do, which I think is pretty much great all the time, is joining PauseAI Bay Area. And I'll have info for the organizer below. Also, if you live somewhere else, I can help you find other places too. We have 30 groups now in the US. You can help to start, especially a university group. We're really working on our pipeline for getting people started with university groups. And so we have some stuff to offer you, but also you would get kind of a chance to help us to learn how the process of doing that. Writing op-eds with the authority of, I'm a student of this, I'm a professor of this, that's often a great place to start with op-eds. And then the local angle, then it's we have general guidance for op-eds. We can definitely help you, if you are interested in doing that. It's really nice to have a lot of different people, kind of multiple votes from multiple places. And then just talking to people around you about AI danger. And if you do believe in pause, talking about pause, because every time you do that, every time people hear this from someone they respect, that shifts the Overton window in that direction. Okay, this is just something you can take a picture of. If you want to do, these are from, increasing difficulty, slacktivist actions, where you're not having to be in the group or having to be a volunteer or anything like that. And then, the hardest one listed here is starting a local group. And then you can see where our listing would be. You can also talk to me if you're interested in that. We have an application and you would go through an application and onboarding process. Everybody get that? Great.
We can post the slides also.
Oh, yes. You also may have just the slides if you want. And then here is our next event coming up on Thursday. That is a happy hour, so that is not right. Oh, sorry, CPM. I hope you guys, Don't make that mistake yourselves. Okay. So it's definitely just at Gmail. So this is Alvaro Cuba is the local organizer for Bay Area. And this one is going to be in SF on Thursday. And there's about 30 people signed up currently. So he does an amazing job. He's better than I ever was at driving. That's like already bigger than any half hour I ever ran. So, and then, oh yes, so if you want like to just like the lowest commitment thing is just like getting on our Discord and like talking. There's, our join link that never expires. And to donate, this is our sort of like small, this is the one you should use if you just want to make like a small donation. If you want to make bigger donations, please feel free to do so. Talk to me. And then I want to open it up to questions, but I first want to say what my question to you is, which is what resources do you want from me? I'm particularly thinking like teaching resources. What would you want to put on a syllabus? I've been asking people that question lately. Or like, so what do you want from me to like help you advocate for PauseAI? Should you be interested in doing that?
You've been listening to Berkeley Talks, a UC Berkeley News podcast from the Office of Communications and Public Affairs that features lectures and conversations at Berkeley. Follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can find all of our podcast episodes with transcripts and photos on UC Berkeley News at news.berkeley.edu/podcasts.